Welcome back, everyone. This week, we're going to talk about the fiasco that's occurring in Panama and ways to play it and ways not to play it and what's going on. To sum things up real quick, if you're unaware, what's occurring is that a mine got an extension to operate, and then the people of Panama are now protesting that mine extension and are calling for essentially a moratorium against all mining, and that's affecting certain companies, certain stocks, and that's something we need to look into to see if there's any buying opportunities. Plus, to be a little bit more worldly and a local cocktail party, and you can discuss how knowledgeable you are of things happening outside of America. So, with that, let's actually start getting into the details, and I'm going to display much of this video using tweets from a certain individual because, as far as I'm concerned, he's boots on the ground, he lives in Panama, he's covering it, and he's also a stock investor, so he also has that certain filter of how things are occurring, and is the one who initially brought it to my attention and has been covering it well as far as I'm concerned. So here it is, the Cobre Panama mine owned by First Quantum Minerals. And what happened essentially is on October 20th, 2023, the government of Panama sanctioned Bill 1100 in the Law 406, and this was subsequently published in the official Gazette. Essentially, it gives a 20-year term with an additional 20-year extension option to the mine. You can read this other information. We have enough information to cover, so I'll allow you to read some of it. It's not necessarily relevant, even though it is relevant, but let's move on. Same thing, the Cobre Panama, the refresh concession contract. Happened on October 20th. That's relevant. Here's a remark. Thanks for sharing. I'm not getting any news on the situation in Panama here in Norway, but it's interesting to follow. I'd really appreciate a longer post where you describe what's going on and why. A person could just go back through people's tweets and make the effort themselves, but what you will find in life is that most people will try their best to outsource effort to you instead of making the effort themselves, which then brings into question how much do they actually want to know something. But I understand it's nice to have a succinct thread, so this is as good as it's going to get on my behalf. First Quantum. So remember, the concession was signed on the 20th. That was on a Friday. And this is the stocks as of the 30th. So there was an entire week of things boiling underneath the surface before a critical mass got hit. And that's important. And the reason I'm presenting this video is because we all make investments in whatever company. And the fact of the matter is most of us really don't actually have a good, thorough understanding of what's happening in that environment on a day-to-day basis, on a development-to-development basis. We just have a cursory understanding and glance, which is why I documented his tweets, because you're not going to get this kind of detail and discussion by reading just the basic articles. They're boilerplate articles that regurgitate what the other articles say, and they're not really covering the material in one consolidated form as one might appreciate. And there's a lot of nuances and developments that occur, and it's hard to follow along because you're bouncing around from one media site to the other media site, and of course they have to speak in the Overton window, which immediately cancels out a lot of relevant information and so on and so forth. So that's crucial to understand, all these micro developments, because this is a story of escalation from, awesome news to, some protesters to, oh boy, things are really picking up steam to how bad can this get, and so on and so forth. So there was a week. There was a week to really pay attention. And a week, that's the span of a vacation. You go on vacation between the 20th and the 30th, and you're clueless, you come look at your screens come Monday morning and the stock you own is down 40, well, this is a week. So I believe it was down, oh boy, this is the wrong screen. I screenshotted the wrong thing. Let's say it was down 20 or 30% though. And you're going to say, what's going on? And then you might try to read some stuff and then you find out, and it's like, they often at first underemphasize the significance and impact. So this is correct. Franco, Nevada was down 8% on Monday. Then by weekend, this last Friday, which would be the 3rd, I believe, the 6th. No. Yeah, the 3rd. So by the 3rd, it was down 34%. At one point, it was down 48%. Friday's close, Franco, Nevada, is down 7%. But it was down 13-ish%. Then there's other names. Whenever something small happens in a niche market or industry or location, opportunities arise because a lot of times there's a sympathetic sell-off for good reason or not. And Price Smart, look it up yourself, figure out what they do, they fell. By October 27th is when these companies took a dive, which was Monday. And they seemingly discounted the news for an entire week. Actually, the 27th was a Friday. So then the 30th was a Monday. So pretty much from the 23rd through the 27th, news was heavily discounted. And then come Friday, people didn't want to hold over the weekend due to what might develop. And then come Monday, due to things developing, people dumped. Now, this is why being able to predict to the best of your ability and assign probabilities to situations is important. Now, I can't say if I owned First Quantum that I would have necessarily sold, but maybe I would have, or maybe I wouldn't have owned it in the first place. But nonetheless, when something happens, I discussed this in part in the recent Israel escalation. There's a bunch of Israeli ADRs. And then you have to ask yourself, okay, let's look at them and see which ones I might be interested in purchasing due to this fall, and or what might be going up as a consequence. What might go down, what might go up. That's the game we play. Then you have Copa Holdings. This is airport. Well, since October 27th, it's up 10%. Now, they have airports across Latin America, but they have a good one in Panama. Now, why might it be up? Well, people's trying to flee the country, perhaps, which we'll get into about them the protesters blocking the airport. So you need to ask yourself what's exposed to this directly and in a concentrated bet, and what isn't. Then you have Orla Mining. Who are they? I don't know, but I found them in my research of who might be exposed to this Panama drama. And seemingly, they have a mine with a project totaling an area of 14,893 hectares located in the Zorro Peninsula of Panama. And then they're now down on the week by 7%. But earlier in the week, they were down 10, 15%. Even though they per se have nothing to do directly with the copper mine, they are a mine. And then now if they're calling for a mining moratorium, then these people will be affected. And then you have to ask yourself how much. You have to go look at the 10Qs and the 10Ks and find out how much exposure and how much revenue and EBITDA, net income, cash flows, whatever is derived from the Panama location. So this is, we're getting ready to get into the story, but this is Franco, Nevada. Revenue by assets. You see Cobre, Panama. As of the 6 months ending June 30th of 2023, Cobre, Panama has generated $126.2 million of revenue for Franco, Nevada, because Franco, Nevada has two, I believe, royalties or royalty and streaming on the Cobre, Panama mine. So this is a knock-on effect. Cobre, Panama is owned by a company, but that company has royalties on it by another company. So you look at the knock-on effects, the first, second, third order effects, and then you play it down the line. Just like if the Fed's going to do a bunch of QE and low interest rates, then oftentimes risk assets, Ponzi stocks, cryptocurrencies, and the like are like a third derivative of easy money and liquidity, and they ramp up really high. It's the same phenomenon. So Franco, Nevada had revenues of $606.2 million for the 6 months ending in 2023. So that means that Cobre Panama is 20.8% of revenue for the first half. Now you can extrapolate that, do the math however you want to. I've seen figures from 16%, 18%. I'm providing you with 20%. So you do the math, figure it out for yourself. They had issues earlier in the year, so it could be more, it could be less, however you want to figure it. And you could say, okay, well, 20% of revenues, then that means the stock could fall. Easy math is stocks fall 20.8% if the Cobre Panama mine gets shut down, and then you have to assign probabilities. If you buy the stock when it was down 13%, then you're saying that there's a 60% odds that the mine gets closed down, and then you buy it because you think the odds are wrong and that it won't get closed down, or that'll be extended or not as interrupted as much. And then you go from there, you place your bets, and you structure the trade however you wish. So, into the story we go. Huge controversy in Panama over the first quantum copper mine, which is about to expand a lot. People say the politicians are selling out the country and destroying the environment. The environmental issue I agree with, but Panama is getting a good deal on the royalties. Now notice, this is October 22nd. The law was passed October 20th. The first mention by this individual, I believe, is October 22nd. And what you're going to note is I've screenshotted the texts, and then I've also sprinkled in things from 10Qs, presentations, and so on and so forth. But what you'll note is that we're going to get to today, essentially, and see how things have developed over time, and how things that were once discounted become less discounted, and then how people's evaluation of the scenario change, which is not being intellectually phase-locked or dogmatic and willing to adapt your view of the world based upon changing fundamentals in the world, which is one reason why a lot of people fail at investing and life in general. People here are very angry. They don't think 40,000 jobs, size after expansion, is a big enough contribution to justify the environmental destruction. My math, the mine will be putting around $1 billion annually into a country with a GDP of $60 billion. It's a significant contribution. Goes on to note, I think excluding gold and silver from the royalties is absurd, and even if people accept the environmental degradation, they should be angry about that part. That being said, $375 million a year minimum to Panama makes a difference in the budget for sure. And then this is the applicable royalty rate at various operating margins as shown below. This came from one of First Quantum's presentations or 10Qs or 10K or something. There's some links in the description, as most of my videos have. I believe there's links to these. It's 13,000 hectares and goes from the Pacific to Atlantic provinces, bleeding into protected environmental zones. They say rivers are running dry because they are being diverted for mine use. It's actually a pretty big deal. Here's a picture from a presentation. Water input and output for mine operational processes in megaliters. And then you can see in subsegments of surface water, groundwater, seawater, third-party supply. And then they have in their presentation, out of their varying mine locations, how much of it's fresh water or otherwise. The Cobre Panama is seemingly all fresh water and low stress as a consequence of it being in a rainforest, essentially. Now, this data will be used against them. That's why I'm providing it here for you, as well as to provide nuance and context. Because they're going to say they're stealing all of our fresh water. Because that's what people do. They make exaggerative comments. Steal. Where are they paying for water? Well, then that's not stealing. Were they granted the water rights? Then that's not stealing. All of the water? So what, you have no water coming out of your tap? These are the kinds of emotional, exaggerated, absolutist binary statements people make. And it's sentimentally true, but factually false. And that's how most humans conduct themselves most of the time. This I found hilarious out of, I think, their ESG presentation. They say that they're a net positive impact on habitat. I find that hard to believe, and I'm also curious as how they calculate that. Because that's a tough one. Like, you have a mine. Like, you're messing up a lot of things. So you're going to have to do a lot of things good and nice to be a net positive. I'm kind of wondering what the qualitative or quantitative metrics they use to gauge that. Of course, they're not as a detriment as they alternatively could be, but then that's more of a relativistic argument. Well, we're mining, but we're also planting some trees is less of a net negative than we're mining and not planting trees. But to say a net positive, that's just a little far, but why wouldn't people lie? So here we go. Hotels across Panama are experiencing waves of cancellations, and gas queues are already filling up as the country prepares for chaos due to mine protests shutting down every major road in the country. There have been rumors that airports will be blocked. Nobody in or out. October 23rd. The U.S. Embassy in Panama has canceled all visa appointments for the next 2 weeks. Another ominous sign for how crazy the first quantum protests may get. The most powerful union in Panama says they don't accept the mining contract with First Quantum, and they're going to paralyze the country. This is the Road and Construction Workers Union, 40,000 people. They're mobilizing along with environmental protesters and the indigenous population to block every major road in Panama to protest the First Quantum copper mine. I believe Panama is 3 million, over 3 million people, so 40,000 out of 3 million, you do the math. But most movements, pretty much all movements, start on the fringe, and then they hit a critical mass, and then they infect the whole population. And all you need generally is a 15% concentration. There's research on this, so don't ask me where, but I can't cite my source. But once a movement hits 15 to 20%, that's all you need for vast adoption. You don't need 50-50. You don't need 40-60. You don't need 30-70. So that's always worthwhile, because then you have ideas such as pluralistic ignorance and false enforcement. You can Google that and see how that's affected societies historically, including in America. For what it's worth, I think a shutdown of the First Quantum mine is unlikely, but I have seen protesters in Panama extract serious concessions from the government in the past. The First Quantum mine is 4% of Panama's GDP and more than 1% of the world's copper supply, and a lot of gold. Remember that. That's October 23rd. His opinion will be changing. Here we have, it's now becoming an anti-PRD government movement. PRD is one of the parties of the government. And then, so now things are escalating to anti-government establishment. So it went from anti-mine extension to anti-particular mine to anti-political party, and then further escalation into anti-mine, i.e. mine moratorium across the country. Escalation. Down with mining. All mining. Well, there you go then. Now, of course, they don't mean that, because Panama is full of farmers, and farmers use fertilizers. And guess where fertilizers, in part, like potash, is developed? Well, from potash mines. Now, of course, this is, of course, a NIMBY, not in my backyard phenomenon, and I'm the same way, not in my backyard, So, but understand that. So down with mining. Well, we'll stop providing them with fertilizer that's mined, and then you'll see how much they're down with mining. I also would like to note that this is just another layer on the whole ESG, going green, carbon emission, blah, blah, blah narrative. because it's kind of hard to get enough copper to go EV and to electrify things if you can't get the copper, because people are shutting down copper mines that produce 1% of the population global supply of copper. Current Panama prediction on protests: it will last less than 10 days. It will look very bad in a week. Then people will get tired and want to do fiestas in November. November 2nd was, I believe, a national holiday for them. If the protesters don't back down by November 2nd, stuff is going to get crazy quickly. Here comes the ranchers with their herds to help block the Pan American Highway in protest of the first quantum copper mine. Never seen this one before. Getting DMs from people asking me about what to do. It likely blows over by November 2nd, which is a major holiday. Tocumen is likely the last place to get shut down, but you could have issues getting there. Tocumen, I believe, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, is the international airport. The city has food issues in 2 to 3 weeks. There are currently widespread allegations of bribery by First Quantum Copper in Panama. Here's a lawyer noting it. President of Panama addresses the nation. He says the mining contract isn't changing and people can peacefully protest all they want, but anybody engaging in vandalism or blocking roadways will face judicial action. He says the mine is important for economic reasons. As we'll see, many of the people blocking roadways have not faced judicial action, so that's false. And you'll see that the narrative that he just put out there about how the mining contract isn't changing is questionable. But good old tough talk, jaw-boning, brinkmanship, saber-rattling, typical human behavior, typical politician behavior. So people are furious and doubling down on their protest activity. This is October 24th. The government is saying they won't give any ground and they have $375 million annually invested in the outcome. Someone says, seems like very little money to risk the country's stability. I don't know enough about how opposed the public is. He goes on to say the government budget is about $4 billion a year, so it's a considerable amount of money. Remember, Panama is a very small country, 65 billion GDP. So that means $375 million of royalty is affecting a $4 billion government budget. You do the math on that. It's a considerable amount. Then he goes on to say, zero chance government is overthrown, close to zero chance mine is shut down, but alterations of contract due to social pressures don't seem impossible. The last time there were weeks of road blockages in Panama, the west part of the country had so much excess food that they were letting people load trucks for free before it went bad. Eastern half runs out of food. Western half runs out of fuel. But we got lots of horses. So that's an interesting logistical concern in regards to Panama. Since there's already thousands of people in the street, Panama today sentenced Ricardo Martinelli, the frontrunner for the presidency, to 10 years in prison for corruption. It's funny how these things get overlooked. The Aldbrook terminal is crowded. People try to get home, but there is no transportation due to the closures. And that might be why you see the airport stock that we covered earlier up 10% in a week. Then you have maps like this. This is what people in Panama are afraid of and don't want. They don't want open pit mines all over the whole country. Let the gringos screw up their own land. Nothing like sprinkling a little racism in there, because why not? Fundamentally, most people are. And of course, this map is a bastardization of the actual mines that will get developed because, as this person noted, exploration isn't a mine though, and only 1 out of 1,000 will be one. And then Calvin notes, people still think that's what will happen. So, what does that note? Well, it notes another common feature of human beings. How delusional and detached from reality they are. They see all of this color that's not green, and they say those will be mines. But it's like, no, exploration doesn't equate mine, because they don't understand the math, which means that their expectations of the world do not match the world, which means they then conduct themselves in error and make unforced errors because they don't understand reality. So there's a mismatch between behavior and reality, and then they overextend themselves, and then they get hurt as a consequence. Hurt such as pretty much shutting your economy down, putting people out of business because they're afraid to visit Panama because it's a vacation destination, putting them out of business, them comping negative numbers week over week or month over month, and don't have the sufficient cash flows to pay their rents and so on and so forth. The vibe in Panama right now, October 25th, the vibe in Panama right now is that people don't want the first quantum copper mine, and at least for now, they don't care if they lose everything. They want what they want. Panama's GDP is said to be losing 90 million every day that commerce is blocked. The country is paralyzed. Holy crap, that's a lot of people. First quantum copper is in trouble. This is October 26th. The movement builds. Critical mass is getting hit, if not already hit. October 27th. The transport unions, this would be Friday, not this past Friday, the Friday before, the transport unions in Panama are joining the protests. Buses and taxis are dropping service in much of the country, even on local roads that aren't blocked. Now remember, he started covering this, so the law was passed on the 20th. The 20th was a Friday. Then the weekend went by, and then so far, what I've read of Calvin's has been the 23rd through the 27th. So all the information I've just covered, the escalation, the protests, how things are developing, has been from the 23rd through the 27th. At this point, many of the stocks that I showed you at the beginning of this presentation have not been negatively impacted. But accumulating this information, you might know, hey, pain is coming. Or maybe not. You can make an assessment and assign probabilities and do whatever you do. But at least you would know. The problem is most people didn't know probably much of anything until they woke up Monday morning and saw their... if you own Franco, Nevada, and you look at your portfolio come Monday and it's down 8%, you're going to say, what in the hell happened? And then what you should have known for the past week now comes to your knowledge. And that's the problem with owning a lot of stocks, is you have to keep up on all of them. And that's hard to do. And I don't even successfully do that, I would say. And this is why it's important to do that. Because you've now had a week of escalating developments to better assess a situation that, in fact, most people won't know until, the 30th. October 28th. Narrative inflects. I think people just sort of faded the social unrest since the approval going through was a positive. But if you asked me a week ago how long the protests would last, I said probably blows over in 10 days. Now I wouldn't be surprised if it goes for months. So he goes from, you could say, one extreme to the other extreme. But notice how he is altering and modifying his opinion as information comes in. Today, mine workers at the first quantum copper mine in Panama were stopped from entering work by protesters who blocked entrance to the mine. Now, I find that interesting. I haven't fact-checked most of these because I did see a Reuters article that said First Quantum put out a note saying that their mining operations have not been interrupted. So, if workers are being blocked, then you think mine operations would be interrupted as a consequence of, not having that labor there to mine. So, not really sure who's telling the truth and who's not, or deriving information from what sources and so on and so forth. But, this is just, you could say, one side. This is his story, his observation, information he's getting. That's why you have to cross-compare. A multi-trait, multi-method model. The more ways you can confirm something to be true, the more true it is, because truth is more of a phenomenon that lies on a spectrum than some absolute binary. Things can be less true or more true, and what you're trying to do is find out as much truth as possible. Today, people went on boats to block exports from the first quantum copper mine and make it clear they aren't welcome in Panama. Now that says today people went on boats to block exports. That does not mean that they successfully blocked said exports. The scale of the copper mine protests in Panama is absolutely incredible. There have never been this many people in the streets of Panama. I've never seen this firsthand, this kind of mobilization by a population to resolve a political issue. So, things are escalating still. I believe this would have been over the weekend. Not this weekend, but the, 28th and 29th weekend. First quantum copper is wrecked. Hits coming from all sides. Panama's Supreme Court, this is October 29th. Panama Supreme Court will consider a lawsuit which alleges that the nation's contract with copper miner First Quantum Minerals violates the Constitution. The court said in a statement that it will issue an opinion on the lawsuit within 10 business days. If it then proceeds, it will request written arguments from attorneys representing both sides. From there, it would advance to the magistrates for a ruling, the court said. Holy crap, they're even protesting in front of the First Quantum office in Toronto. Then he notes, when the Escobal mine in Guatemala got shut down, it was just one tribe protesting. The entire country of Panama is trying to shut down First Quantum. And you see this across the world, by the way. You have the natives of, I'm going to misspeak here. The natives of, I think, Norway with the reindeer herders interrupting the development of uranium mining in that country. Scandinavia, Norway, it's not Finland, it's not Denmark. It's one of those. And so you can see that, Greenland has these issues. Most people are familiar with it in regards to Canada and the First Nations, but it happens everywhere. This is one of the risks. It's not just political risk, there's also, you could call it tribal risk, such as the Guatemala incident. And then this guy goes on to say, that's what you get if you invest in socialist countries. And then Calvin fact checks him and says, neither case had anything to do with socialism. In fact, in both cases, the government had negotiated a good deal which was rejected by the people. And then Calvin notes that the main concerns here are bribery, corruption, environmental, and constitutional. Then you have Yellow Lab Life Capital. If you're into mine investing and don't follow this individual on Twitter, you maybe should. I believe he did a podcast episode on, Macro Hive. At some point, you can look that up. So, the Yellow Cab Life Capital says, he refers to himself as the koala, by the way. Shame the koala doesn't speak Spanish, but not that it will matter to the protesters. This quote-unquote New Deal was a renegotiation in favor of Panama. FM has title until 2037. Trying to think through where this all settles out. Appreciate the on-the-ground color. Now, that's interesting, don't you think? Because this mine isn't new. It's not like this mine is asking for permits. It's not like this mine is doing pre-feasibility studies. This mine has been established for years. Not tons of, a few years. And it's been mining copper. And now they're trying to extend the mine, as many mines do. And now the people have a problem. Which is interesting, because seems the story is something along the lines of they try to pass it through right quick on a Friday, and that the government is being bribed, or officials in the government are being bribed, and that's why they did this. That's the narrative. And maybe that is what happened. Who knows? But that still doesn't mean it's still not in the best interest for Panama. And then you have to define what does that mean to be in the best interest. But if you weren't protesting this mine for years, and now you are saying we don't want, why now? Why not then? And the answer is because that's how humans behave. They let things escalate to a point of severity that they can't not address it, instead of cutting it off at the pass and acting with foresight. If you allow a mine in your backyard, then you're also saying we're going to allow that mine to expand, because that's what many mines do. that's not how people act. October 29th, the vice president of Panama was one of the lawyers for First Quantum. One of the presidential candidates is another lawyer for First Quantum. And you guys say people are mad because socialism. This is the problem with casual critique and personal incredulous individuals, is they always want to say something stupid, like, that's what you get for investing in socialism. It's like, well, first of all, it's not a socialist country. And like, how loosely are you defining and abstracting things in order to quantify it as socialist? And it completely misses the point. And as a consequence of missing the point, whatever corrective measures you're going to implement will be wrong. And then in all reality, you're probably, through implementing new measures, will create more problems. And you see this all the time. People don't know how to accurately source the reason behind the results of something, whatever it is, whether it's, I have back pain. Let me give you a real simple example, because I really like to abstract this thing out, and how people think shows up 1,000 times over. So what am I saying? Well, you say I have back pain. There must be something wrong with my back. Well, are you sure that you don't have an anterior pelvic tilt due to having tight hamstrings? I'm sorry, due to having tight hip flexors? And then that could be overarching your back, causing pain. So here you go, day in, day out, going to the chiropractor, getting massages, looking at back surgery. Now you get back surgery because of this back pain. Well, that's not going to help. It might alleviate symptoms at first, but it won't address the actual source. Or you could say, oh man, I have shoulder pain. Must be something wrong with my shoulder. But maybe you have a kyphotic posture as a consequence of benching too much and not doing enough back exercises, and you have a muscular imbalance. But people don't say that. Or you can say, I have knee pain. There must be something wrong with my knee. Not that you have a muscular imbalance between your knee and your overstretched hamstrings. And just on it goes. People misattribute reasons and they ignore them. They give you a partial account for things. Like a lot of people say they can't do pistol squats. And you ask them why they can't do pistol squats. The primary answer I get is, my knee, I got a knee problem, or my knee can't handle it. It's like, well, that is technically true, but number one, you're just too weak. And number two, your calf and Achilles tendon and your ankle is too tight, which then causes you to overextend forward because you can't get in the position correctly, which then puts strain on your knee, which is where you feel the pain, causing you to say, I have a bad knee. It's like, no, that's not really why. Like, if you could get strong enough and flexible enough, then you wouldn't have this knee issue. So, gone on that dovetailed tangent long enough. Some foreign company comes into your backyard and gets licensed to extract all the gold and silver they want. They subject to only 2% corporate income tax. They are only subject to royalty tax on a max of 16% of what they compute as their gross profit. Is it fair? I think the issue here is that Panama's territorial taxation system just doesn't work for resource extraction. Is it really fair to classify mining, fishing, forestry, and other rape the land type business models as foreign because proceeds were generated outside of Panama? Then he says First Quantum does not pay normal income tax of 25%. They are paying $10 a hectare, about $130,000 a year, and the royalty tax and nothing else, with a 2% minimum, which is standard for all companies that benefit from Panama's territorial tax. This is why the Panamanian government is highly unlikely to back down to the protesters. First Quantum is supposed to pay $395 million to Panama within 30 days, almost 10% of the budget. Nice things like fuel subsidies and almost free education have to get funded somehow. How will Panama use the funds generated from the First Quantum copper mine? On the first $400 million, 70% fund Social Security programs like disability and pensions. 25% for infrastructure projects in the area the mine operates in, and 5% for teachers. 100% above $400 million to general fund. Environmental concerns on the first quantum mining contract. Approval was based on a 2011 study before the mine started operating. The mine gets an unlimited water concession, superseded only by the canal itself. The mine could even make electric dams to power itself. My first full read over the first quantum contract basically brings me to the same conclusion I made on the blog a week ago. There are some valid environmental concerns. Panama is getting a good deal relative to what the country can afford. Have to fund a budget somehow. Was there bribery, corruption? Some government officials are very close to the mine, in some cases literally employed. I don't think any proof has been presented that anyone was paid to vote yes on the mining contract. Is it possible that the mining contract violates the Panamanian Constitution? The Supreme Court of Panama is considering the issue. Many prominent lawyers are arguing this. Are there valid environmental concerns? Rubber stamping? Definitely. I think overall the mining contract is a flashpoint for many people who are tired of corruption and see evidence of it. Maybe some unions and teachers who want to get a piece of the pie for themselves, and frustration that have built since COVID. The country is up in arms. Which is to say that the mine is merely a medium. Yet again, this is how people conduct themselves all the time. The mine is a medium to express disgruntled concerns in relation to other dynamics and issues. The mine isn't per se the issue. The mine is how people funnel and channel their energy. It's a placeholder. And now they're going to, wreck a large income producing source of revenue for the country as a consequence of, because you could just discuss ideas like corruption and misappropriated funds and things like that, environmental concerns, rubber stamping, how they're not considered on ideas or things like that. Like you could express those ideas and then point to instances without actually undermining those scenarios, like the mine. But that's not how people work. They need something to fixate on. And that's just unfortunate quite often. I think there's real risk here for shareholders of the company, in which case he's talking about the mining company. I don't see the protests stopping. I see credible legal challenges to the contract. There are also big risks to Panama itself, both in the near term due to the unrest, disruption, and in future legal challenges. Do the protesters understand the consequences of their actions? I doubt it. Many would probably not have answers for how you fund social programs without the mine revenue. Many would not know what to do about the lost jobs, but that won't stop them from fighting the mine. Yep. People go and do what people do. The president of Panama just announced that on December 17th, they're going to put the acceptance of the mining contract to a popular vote. Holy crap, the government caved. Copper mining in Panama will be determined by a popular referendum. The Panamanian government caved. They're going to let the population decide by referendum. Well, that's quite a different story than what the president was saying a week prior. 1.5% of global copper production is now subject to the whim of Panamanian referendum, not to mention the gold. What a time to be alive and be living in this country. Still on October 29th. Okay, now how does the copper mine protest in Panama affect shipping? If the mine gets shut down, Panama will be taken to international arbitration. A loss could increase Panama's sovereign debt by a quarter. Plan on canal fees increasing. Inflation wins again. And then someone asks, what do you base the quarter on? Panama's debt is around $45 billion. I figure write-offs plus damages, Panama could be looking at north of $10 billion in arbitration losses, and that may be a very conservative guess. I computed net present value of the contract for Panama at around $7.5 billion. Not unfathomable scenario on how the Panama Canal goes back into U.S. hands. Now you could say, oh, I'm sick of these conspiratorial narratives. Well, you're not operating in reality, is all I have to say to that. Panama votes in the mining referendum on December 17th. The election results is yes and results in widespread outrage and mistrust. There's a coup. The U.S. sees the canal is in danger and seizes it. What's the probability of that? Yet again, that's for you to assign. October 30th. The Panama government releases a statement on the financial consequences of rejecting the mine contract. Panamanian journalist with huge following says that these literally objective facts around consequences are intimidating and fear tactics. And they are. Like, if I say, look both ways before crossing the street, if you don't, you might get hit by a car and die, that is a fear tactic. It's also a realistic representation, abstracted in verbal speech, as to what might occur. So yes, it is a fear tactic, but it's not only a fear tactic. It is, well, practical wisdom. So yet again, that is a true statement, but it's not an entirely true statement, as in it doesn't have in it, the composite of the statement doesn't include all the truths. So yes, it is a fair tactic. Just like putting the referendum, why December 17th? Why not this past weekend, right? Well, the reason is because they want things to cool down. They know people, they know that news stories last 1 to 3 weeks. Ben Hunt has some interesting diagrams, but you can look it up elsewhere about news stories and headlines last 1 to 3 weeks, and then they rapidly die off. People's attention gets distracted. People can't commit to things. People aren't generally willing to make short-term sacrifices for long-term gains. Short-term being, in this case, more than a couple of weeks. And then when there's pushback, which we'll get into in a few days worth of tweets, protesters of the protesters start emerging, and then pushback occurs, and people don't have the resolve and confidence and commitment to stick with it. That's why you extend it to December 17th. Anyway, so back to the fear-mongering or fear tactics. Here you see them. They're in Espanol, so you can't read them unless you can speak Spanish and read Spanish. You can translate these images via Google if you want the points all broken down. I learned this trick a few weeks ago. I actually learned it on a YouTube short because seemingly in some Japanese restaurants, if you are an American, they will provide you with a different menu than if you're a local. And this menu that they provide you is both in English, but it also has higher food prices than the Japanese one, which means they're extorting you as a tourist. And in this video, they said a way to avoid this is by getting on your phone and clicking on Google Lens. I recommend you look this up. This is fantastic and really opened my eyes to the world. You go to Google Lens. If you have a phone with the Google search bar, you see the Google image on the left, then a microphone, and then this little camera thing. You click on the camera thing, which then brings up Google Lens, or you could just Google Lens, and then it says search with your camera. And then you hit the little button, and then it says open camera, and then you open the camera, and then you hit translate, and then it will translate, and I'll show you rather soon what this looks like, and then it will translate the speech from whatever language you choose to whatever language you choose. In this case, it'll be Spanish to English. And then you can do that by getting the Japanese menu with the actual cheaper prices and not get ripped off. And that has really come in handy. So when he says you can translate these images via Google, that's how you do it. And it's beautiful technology as far as I'm concerned. It has some work to it, but so what? It's free and it works 90, 95% accurately. Rejecting the contract will result in billions, maybe tens of billions in losses for the Panamanian government. It can break public finance and result in losing 40,000 jobs. The protesters are almost heroic in their determination, but they are also showing an unwillingness to become educated on the consequences of their action. Well, that's most people most of the time. And misrepresenting what the contract itself actually does. What a surprise. But maybe mass disorder is the only way to influence policy. Let me ask you this. The amount that I've looked into this and have read and educated myself on this matter, you would think that every protester, I mean, if you're willing to take to the streets, you think that they would educate themselves as well as I have. Like, I have no skin in the game. I'm not a citizen, and I'm not even invested in anything, even though I might make an investment. But I've taken the time to learn this. You think they would. But then you need to notice what I just said. You think they would. It's like, well, why would you think that? What evidence have I come across in my life? Like, I'm just projecting myself on other people, which is meaning that I'm detached from reality, because that's not reality. Because most people aren't like me. Let me just put it that way. But so it's very interesting. So you can say, well, how educated are these people? Well, it has nothing to do about education or facts. It has to do about feelings and sensation and sentiment. Which, well, see how well that does for people. So here you go. Cortizo announces that the people will decide, but today it's all in the newspapers. They announced that if the contract is revoked, our finances would be bankrupt. The rescue of abandoned workers would be suspended, and subsidies would certainly have to be suspended. It's just that they don't help each other. So this is what the Google Lens looks like. And I'll let you read it. We've covered the gist of it. Billions of dollars lost, tens of thousands of jobs lost, GDP goes down, stuff like that. Let's see. This multi-billion-dollar demand would bankrupt our public finances, make inevitable a reduction in the investment grade by all risk rating agencies, which would prevent funds from being obtained in the bond market and could generate an unprecedented run on funds, leading to a trot with the important activity of our international financial center. You think people give a shit about that? They don't even understand the statement. They don't understand credit markets. It's amazing how ignorant, inept, incompetent, and personally incredulous most people are that are homeowners. They don't understand. They don't understand equity and gearing and ratios and leverage and credit quality, even though they act in the world. But that's how most people are. They're complacent and complicit and desensitized and overconfident in what they do day-to-day life. That's why most people will give you all kinds of advice that's just stupid and not applicable and doesn't even work in their favor, but it's a good boiler template plate expression and platitude that doesn't really aid in anything and isn't contextualized well enough to actually enact. But that's how people act. So you can say, hey, let me reason with you. It's like how naive, How naive. So this is one of those. Panama, key rating drivers. Yet again, one of the reasons why I present things in the format I do on this video is for you to be able to read the things on the screen, because as I've noted before, it is really irritating for people on YouTube or videos in general, between audio quality and putting too small a print on the screen, you can't read it. Like, come on. So this is I think Fitch. It's a negative outlook on Panama's negative outlook, reflects persistent fiscal pressures and uncertainty prospects for consolidation, weak fiscal credibility, challenging fiscal consolidation, wide 2024 budget, gradual debt increase, pension subsystem, a medium-term risk. And you just read the details if you want to, or I believe there's a link in the description. The Panama Canal Pilots Union just basically blamed the water issues the canal has faced on the copper mine and called for a complete moratorium of all open pit mining activity. Like, isn't that interesting? Like, let's say that for a fact that Cobre, Panama is in fact causing issues to the Panama Canal. That doesn't mean that all mines are causing issues to the Panama Canal. So why shut those down? Well, because this is a foot in the door technique. That's why. So you see it in Espanol. Here it is. If you can speak Spanish, then you can read it, or read Spanish, I should say. This is what it says in English. Yet again, I did it for you. The Union of Pilots of the Panama Canal respectfully call on the Supreme Court of Justice to give priority to the corresponding procedure required by the unconstitutionally claims presented by the Contract Law number 406 of October 20th, 2023. And, I kind of wonder too, so when they've been operating for years, hence, was that unconstitutional? Why is this unconstitutional? And of course, there's, as we noted, that video and other links in the description kind of elaborate why, but I am curious, was before October 20th also unconstitutional? Why did it require this inflection point to bring it into people's purview? So, they go on, talking about water, and Panama cannot live without water, but it can live without mining. Well, that's an interesting statement. Nice little platitude. So all that money going to disability and this and that. So you're telling me that if the GDP gets, if the budget gets cut by, I don't know, whatever 300, I can't do the math, 8%, 7%, something like that. If they're expecting $375 million on a $4 billion budget, we'll just call it 8-9%. So not 8-9% of funding going to aid and help people, disabilities, elderly, transportation, i.e. getting to the hospital and blah, blah, blah. So maybe mining, if it saves one life, well, mining creates money that provides services, and those services might save a life. You could posit that argument. It's a weak argument, I know, but this is the problem with factually false statements that are sentimentally true. And I'm not even sure if it's how true it is, because as I noted earlier, okay, it can live without mining. Fine, don't use potassium fertilizer. The natural gas and potash mines and all the other things that create the fertilizers you use, not to mention the metal that was mined in local Brazil that then gets manufactured into local by 1,000 miles within Latin America, and then becomes a tractor that you use to then mine, or the hoe that you use to turn over the soil. It's like people are so detached from reality and the contributions that mining make. It's absolutely incredible. Just like all the people stop coal, but they don't even know the difference between metallurgical coal and thermal coal. If you stopped all coal, then that means electric arc furnaces. It's like, okay, well, how do they compare to furnaces that use metallurgical coal, and what's the implications, and how does that affect infrastructure and needs? And if you could have roads and hospitals and ambulances made out of steel, and just on it goes. People are, well, personally incredulous doesn't have enough of emotional impact. I don't know, degenerately inept and savagely malicious in their willful blindness in regards to mining. Yeah, is mining nasty? Absolutely. Does it kill things, kill people? Absolutely. Well, back to the net positive. What kind of quality of life does it contribute? And I mean, you have to make the decision, but people choose to be so willfully ignorant that, as far as I'm concerned, they're just stupid. Because if someone will tell you facts and then you just dismiss the facts, you are no longer ignorant. You choose to dismiss, and not really even choose, because most people are predominantly non-playable characters and barely sentient, and it's their unconscious and subconscious and their emotions and their prime brain, their primordial, brain that determines what they do. So I can't even say that they make the choice, but ultimately you have to hold them accountable like they're a conscious human being. They choose to be so dismissive of information, both by literally dismissing information as you tell it to them, by just dismissing it, disqualifying it, not based upon the merits of the ideas, but they just know that doesn't fit to my a priori notions and deeply held self-narratives that I've overly committed my ego to. Like, I'm for the environment, therefore I'm against mining. It's like, but watch me wear this clothing that got shipped over here on boats that was derived from mining, and machines used to make the clothing that was derived from mining materials, and the shoes that were extracted out of the ground from petrochemicals, and just like incredible. October 30th, they're now blocking access to the airport in Panama. Yous can't leave. What do you think happens in referendum? The tribunal electoral is questioning whether the referendum is even legally possible. Whole thing is a cluster. Protesters aren't stopping. Here we go. October 31st, a lot of people, including the Panama Canal Pilot Union, are claiming that the copper mine is draining water from the watershed, and that's the reason for the low water levels. I personally think it's due to cutting down too many trees for housing projects. So, spurious correlations are all you need to validate your emotions. I've said it before, not too frequently, that people don't need facts to have an opinion, and they don't need facts to have a strongly held opinion. Only time people need facts is to post hoc rationalize something to justify themselves. And they only need to do that insofar as making an internally consistent argument, not an objectively true argument. And this video has gone on long enough, so I will stop overly explaining on things which I think are necessary, but here we go. This would be pretty easy to determine using normal hydrogeological data and compare that to minimum water drawdown. I am sure such studies have been performed. First Quantum is a signatory to international mining bodies requiring such studies. Calvin notes, if they were performed, they weren't used in the mine approvals. The approval was based on 2011 environmental impact study. This is a pretty picture of stuff by the Canal de Panama. Then he notes, Panama could continue to face significant water pressure from weather patterns that continue to push down the canal transit capacity. Interesting piece. Atlantic, meridional overturning circulation, AMOC. This is an interesting article. I sure hope I put a link in the description. If not, you can go to thesophisticatedchimp.com and read about it, or just Google it if you wish. What is the AMOC? The AMOC stands for Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation and is the engine for a conveyor belt of ocean currents that regulate the Atlantic's temperature. To be more precise, a portion of the warm waters from the Gulf Stream break away from northern Europe towards Greenland and are then cooled by the glaciers. The cooled water becomes less denser than the surrounding water, falls rapidly to the ocean floor, and initiates a deep ocean current in a more southerly path carrying cooler temperatures and oxygen. At the other end of this conveyor belt, waters are forced from the seafloor and nutrients are brought up along with cooler waters to then travel along the ocean's surface currents. It's actually a really fascinating topic that I came across a few years ago, and what's quite interesting, like you have the jet streams of the air. This is the metaphorical jet streams of the ocean. Very interesting stuff. And notice people don't cite that. So this has nothing to do with it. But you would think if you're all about the global warming narrative, then you would bring this up. But now you're blaming the mining. It's like, well, which is it? So it's not this? And then if it's this and the mining, then how much of it is of both? Yet again, I've asked one too many questions. And by the way, one too many questions is one question. Because anything that isn't complete and utter support for a narrative is considered and condemned as denial of that narrative. You immediately become the enemy. Someone says something, you ask for clarity, context, or contribute additional variables, then you are the enemy. But whatevs. It's starting. The farmers in my province are dumping thousands of pounds of produce they can't export. The gas stations here are already all out of fuel. Within weeks, supermarket shelves in Panama City will be empty, all because a mine didn't get a new environmental study. Now, that's one way of wording it. Or you could say, all because the politicians chose not to force the mine to get a new environmental study. And that also presupposes that a new environmental study would make a difference, which you could reasonably conclude it might, but You have to question the concepts in a statement as much as a statement itself. You have to question why someone says something. Like they should, if I say they should have gotten a new environmental study before allowing the extension and commissions of the mine, that presupposes that they should, and then you have to argue why. And then I'm not saying there's not an argument to be made, I'm just saying that's how you need to think. Now this was October 31st. News release, October 31st by First Quantum. I should have enlarged this. Don't know why I didn't. I'm not going to read all that. You can read it, or you can go to the First Quantum website and read it for yourself. Now, I found this interesting, so I'll just put it here. Don't know how to pronounce that. But America's second lung, as Panama's rainforest is known, is in danger. This vast territory of 21,000 square kilometers, 8,000 square feet, of lush vegetation, lagoons, and unique animal species has turned into a coveted target for international oil companies. In 2011, not quite sure what happened in 2011, both between that's when the environmental study for Cobre, Panama was done, but also this seemingly. I suspect it's because we were coming out of the great financial crisis by then and things were ramping up and people were exploring again, I suspect, after a few years. But in 2011, Panama found that Darien held oil reserves of more than 900 million barrels, according to a report by consulting company OTS Latin America LLC. Blah, blah, blah. I just found that interesting. I was unaware of that. So, he said weeks, they'll run out of food. Well, it seems to be a couple of days. But during the, gotta be careful how I word things. The last situation we had, let's just call it the pandemic, we saw a lot of propaganda and agitprop about how shelves were empty. And in some cases that was true, and in some cases it wasn't, and it was misrepresented. And so I'm now, well, even before then, but even more so now, am skeptical of such things, but I do believe this. Because, I mean, I went to my own grocery store back in, like, it was interesting. The bread, it's always the bread. People go for the bread. I don't know why, calorically dense. I don't eat a lot of bread. So I don't really even go to the bread aisle. But and it's always funny because tons of flour, all the bread's gone. People don't make bread. That's the conclusion there. But it's always the bread. Supermarket shelves in Panamanian cities are already starting to run empty as protesters have blocked the roads, preventing food shipments and agricultural exports. Protesters say they won't stop until the first quantum copper mine has been shut down. Now, back to conspiracies. Russia today has released a scathing report on Canadian mining activity in Latin America. The report accuses Canadian companies of exploiting weak government controls, creating environmental tragedies, and failing to consult local communities. So someone says, so it's Russia stirring up all this stuff. And then Calvin notes, could be. They've been stirring the pot in Venezuela and Nicaragua, oh my gosh, recently. Now, you could say, oh, boo, that's nonsense. It's always funny. People always say, it's funny how people perceive the world and act in the world, which is more important. And they say things like, I'm a fallible human being and I make mistakes. We all do. But it's always interesting. You can get in 100 varying altercations, arguments, discussions, debates with that person. And 100 out of 100 times, they will say they're right. It's like I'm wrong on things, but only in retrospect, but never in present time. Well, the same goes with conspiracy theories, which I'm using that word very loosely and perhaps not how you're accustomed to hearing it, because conspiracies are real. And a theory, people confuse theory in the scientific sense. They're like, well, that's just a theory. It's like, theory in the scientific sense does not mean how people take it in day-to-day language. Like, theory of gravity. Well, that's just a theory. Okay, put a brick over your head and see what happens. And they won't, because they won't. And so, same thing with conspiracy theories. Like, companies, governments fund protests in other countries. It's a common behavior. Many governments have done it many a times. And there's numerous reasons why they do it. Like, there's nothing new. They also fund coups. Like, there's nothing new to it. And there's all kinds of reasons that we're not going to get into to do it. And all you have to do is look at history. And people say, well, that was the 1950s. It's like, well, what about the 60s? What about the 70s? What about, it's like on and on. Like, to pretty much present day, you can find evidence of this. But then any present time you suggest that a country is funding another country's protest, they deny it. It's like, it's just very interesting how that works. But then they'll admit that, yes, governments have done this before, but they're not currently doing it. And then fast forward 10 years, they'll be like, yes, in the past 10 years, governments have done it, but they're not currently doing it. And then fast forward 10 years, they're like, yes, in the past. It's like, it's beautiful. Drone footage so I find this very interesting. Drone footage of environmental destruction from the first quantum copper mine. Let's review the facts. That's a statement that should always trigger you immediately. Local communities say they were not consulted. Current mine permit is based on 2011 environmental study. There is video evidence of environmental destruction. All you have to do is take a picture of a mine. A mine is a picture of an evidence of environmental destruction. Matter of fact, walk outside your house or apartment complex or condo or townhome and take a picture of it. That's evidence of environmental destruction. Take a picture of your vehicle. Evidence of environmental destruction. And just play this game. Take a picture of your shoes. Evidence of environmental destruction. That little trail you like to walk on or jog on. Evidence of environmental destruction. So let's not forget that. And second of all, this is kind of a damning video of environmental destruction. I will say that. But you don't know what you don't know. So then someone says, this is called a tailings pond. And then Calvin says, you don't see all the dead trees all over the place, ? I know what a tailings pond is. I've literally helped dig one before. And the individual goes on to note, looks like a valley fill. Well, that's interesting. And I don't know that video, whether that is a valley filled tailings pond or not. And by the way, many Army Corps of Engineer lakes, they often flood areas. And what you'll see is a bunch of dead trees standing in the water because they flooded the area to expand the lake. So they've expanded the lake. Well, is that not environmental damage? And the answer is yes. Look at all the dead trees. If dead trees in water equals environmental destruction, then many of the Army Corps of Engineers lands and lakes are environmental destruction. Now, you could say that's absurd, you're leaving out details, and I am. But let's stick to the facts. That's the problem with stick to the facts. It's like, what about the other facts, such as this being a valley-filled tailing pond? Is it or is it not? The answer is fundamentally you don't know. I don't know if that video is or is not. And everybody, by everybody, I mean the majority of people who see that video, including myself when I first saw it, and I was like, man, this is some damning evidence. Damning, no pun intended. So you have to contextualize it. And you can say, what else could this be? But that takes second knock-on effect, iterative, critical thought. People don't do that. This is really what the Panama protests come down to. If there's no wild, then there's no patacones. Patacones are the staple of the Panamanian diet. Mess with patacones and you mess with all Panamanians. Yes, way to reduce a mine down to patacones. Like, I don't know what this says in Spanish, but like, how's that mine affecting patacones? And by the way, if you've not had patacones, perhaps you should, because they can be quite tasty. And I would recommend looking this up. I'm sure if you just typed in patacones, however you pronounce that, Colombian style, if you just Google this, you can do that yourself. Many supermarkets have plantains across the country, and it's not hard to get tomato and onion sauce, so you can make your own patacones. It's delicious. That's a complete side note, but why not, be a little bit more culturally diverse and ethnical in your cuisine, because you're missing out. I've talked about this before with Georgian from Georgia, the country, tarragon lemonade. If you haven't had it, track it down. Let me know where you found it, because I would like to know, because it's really hard to find. Madison, Wisconsin is the only place I know to get some. But back to business, how is the copper mine affecting their ability to get patacones? Well, it's not. I mean, have they been struggling to get patacones in the last 5 years as the mine's been operating? No? Okay then. But that's the problem. It's a placeholder for a sentiment, and it's used to express ideas that aren't being articulated because people are uneducated and inarticulate. So then they act emotionally and impulsively and on, and then it doesn't work out well. Local rumor, and could be totally baseless, that Suntrax, largest union in Panama, has been preparing and stocking up for quite a while before the protests started and is receiving support from outside the country. They purportedly have 6 months of supply stockpiles. Many people have noted that the pace at which the protests gain steam and the level of organization and determination seems inorganic. I suppose it's definitely possible that Russia is helping these protests along, considering how quickly RT was on the ground covering it. Counter-protests, November 1st. Counter-protests starting to show up, demanding protests open the road in, I don't know how to pronounce that, live feed showing developing conflict between opposing groups. So where's the bottom at? Well, the stocks bottomed so far, I think Wednesday, this past Wednesday. And then Franco, Nevada and First Quantum bottomed Wednesday, and then Thursday and Friday they went up. So is that the bottom? And then November 1st, is this the bottom? Counter protests arriving, people threatening to arrest people, arrest making happening. The Highlands Producers Community Association farmers group in Panama have stated that due to mine protests blocking the roads with machetes and other weapons, they have suffered irreversible losses of crops and income. The farmers and some of the business owners who accept this for too long. There is strong gun ownership among these classes, and if the state will not restore order, they will. Apparently, Panamanian police are conducting arrests of union leaders, right? Anytime there's opposition, you take out the leaders. Doesn't matter if it's a group of people bullying you on the sidewalk or if it's a coup or anything in between. You take out the leaders, organization becomes disorderly, chaotic, in-group fighting, blah, 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 loses momentum, people give up. Same thing, as I noticed earlier, for a movement to get started and really to take hold, you need 15 or 20% of people to adopt it, and then it hits critical mass, flashing a boiling point, flash point, and then things can really take off. Well, the converse is true. If 15 or 20% of people all of a sudden together lose hope, attitudes and emotions are infectious. That's why things happen really quick and then dissipate really quick. And the converse can happen. So all you need is 15 or 20% of people to become despondent, and then it can really take the sails out of a movement. November 3rd. Today and Mondays are holidays in Panama. Prediction: on Tuesday, they'll announce moratorium on all mining and the cancellation of the mining contract with First Quantum. And then come the credit downgrades. Panama's Attorney General is now stating that the mining contract is unconstitutional. They are going to void the whole thing and put a moratorium on all mining activity. Price Smarts, if you remember, that's the name of a stock we looked at the beginning of the video. It does business across Latin America, including Panama. Website in Panama is showing that they are completely out of most fruits and vegetables in all locations. Supply chain has been destroyed. The Panama legislation is in the final steps of banning all mining activity within the country. Now, I've said that for the most part, as best as I can tell, pretty much everything Calvin has noted here is pretty well spot on and properly contextualized and so on and so forth. I have an issue with this, and I don't know what to make of it. And I actually asked him to clarify this and his thoughts, and he did not reply, is what it is, because I am genuinely confused. And I mean, the man obviously knows more than I do. That's why I'm citing him as a source, so that's why I inquired with him. So now I can only use my own discretion, and since my discretion is predicated to some extent on the beliefs and the ideas and opinions of other people, because fundamentally investing is about crowdsourcing ideas, because as much as people say they're self-taught, if you're self-taught on how to patch a hole in the sheetrock, you probably Googled how to do it. And then you sourced numerous people of how they patch sheetrock, and then you compiled the information in a comprehensive network of good ideas, better ideas, and worse ideas, and then you executed based upon that. And you could do that with a million things. Self-taught is really to say crowdsourcing. And much of financing is that way. Other people do great work investigating, cue you in on ideas, and then you go from there. So I really want to stress that. That's why I reference Twitter all the time. It's an amazing place to find tons of information. Both stupid people saying dumb things that teach you how not to think, what not to say, and then smart people that, well, conversely, demonstrate how to think and how to conduct yourself and how to be a good person. But I digress on that tangent. So what I have an issue with is, because he seems pretty hard-pressed in a few of his tweets about this legislation is banning all mining activity and creating a moratorium on all mining activity. Okay, now this is interesting because Suntrax, which is in opposition to the mining and what's a mining moratorium seemingly, and First Quantum and the Cobre Panama mine shut down, noted that in the end, the deputies decided to keep the First Quantum snake half alive, leaving it in the hands of the corrupt Supreme Court of Justice. We continue on the street until we see it disappear from Panama. So this is where I really struggle, because Suntrax is saying that First Quantum is still able to operate even with this legislation. But Calvin seems to be noting that the legislation is going to shut Cobre Panama down. But that's not true. It seems, according to Suntrax, the Supreme Court would be the ones to shut them down. And maybe the Supreme Court is influenced by the legislation. So you could say by extension, the legislation was a catalyst to it being shut down. But it's not the same difference. There's an ultimate versus proximal causation and causal chain there that is important to distinguish and note. So this is what it says, Spanish. This is what it says, and this is the issue I take because I'm not quite sure what to make of it, and so I'm going to read it to you. So my issue is fundamentally the difference between Article 1 versus Article 2 and 3. So Article 1 seems to be speaking in more absolutist, broad terms, while Article 2 and 3 seems to have this caveated, nuanced, quote-unquote, new dynamic to it. So you can't say, we're banning all mines, and then say we're banning new mines. It's like, well, yeah, of course, new falls into the subcategory of all. Not necessarily, because you could say all present mines, but not necessarily new mines. But if you say, well, let me just read this. Article 1. In accordance with the precautionary principle, which implies that the state's duty to ensure the health of the population and guarantee that they live in a healthy and pollution-free environment, an indefinite moratorium is declared on the granting of concessions for the carrying out exploration, extraction, transportation, and benefit activities of metallic minerals throughout the national territory. Okay, well, first of all, pollution-free environment. So I guess they're banning cars now. Ha ha ha. So that's a lie. But it's also interesting that they say metallic minerals. So that's not banning all mining. Because now, it might be, in all fairness, banning all mining in Panama because perhaps all mines in Panama are metallic mines. So it could be true. But let's say that there's a potash mine in Panama, because I've been beating a dead horse on that one. Well, that's not a metallic mineral, as far as I know. So would that be allowed to go on? Even though people object to potash mines due to the pollutants in the environment and groundwater and such matters that occur as a consequence, or at least allegedly. So that's interesting. But nonetheless, to stay on point, which you could say I tangentially was, they said an indefinite moratorium is declared on the granting of concessions for the carrying out blah, blah, blah. Okay, the granting of concessions. So does that mean that they're no longer going to grant concessions? Well, it just so happens that the first Quantum Mines concession was granted on the 20th. So if this passes the day that it was made, I believe November 2nd, then they don't need to grant it. The concession was granted already. So it's not like that concession was coming up in the following weeks. It already happened. So boom, they got their 20 years, plus an additional 20 years. But maybe they won't get the additional 20 years. But so the moratorium of granting concessions. So is that to say that they're retracting concessions made? Or is that to say that they're no longer providing concessions? So Article 2 goes on to say, the provisions of the previous article mean that the Ministry of Commerce and Industries may not grant concessions for the exploration, extraction, transportation, and benefit of metallic minerals in the Republic of Panama, and that will reject outright any new application presented for the obtaining such concessions from the enactment of this law. And the problem with that is any new application presented. Well, you wouldn't need to say that if you declaratively and absolutely initially said, we're calling for an all-out moratorium on mining, which seems to be how people are taking the Article 1, or some people, or Calvin at least. And I don't want to put words in his mouth, but since he didn't reply to me and I'm confused about the matter, then that's what I'm led to do. And by the way, I follow Calvin. He rubs a lot of people the wrong way. That's beside the point. I mean, he's a source of information. You have to say, what's the merit of the information? And people want to attack the medium instead of the message. But the question is the message correct? Not, is the medium a good person? It's like, I'm more concerned about the praxeological description of what is, not some ideological prescription of what should be. Like, those are two different arguments. And fundamentally, if you, for sake of argument, you can say he's, if he's a bad person, that, bad people can say true things. Like, if a bad person says a banana is yellow, you could be like, don't listen to that guy, he's a bad person. Don't believe what he says. So am I not supposed to believe bananas are yellow? Am I supposed to, bring that into question? It's absurd, but that's how most people act yet again. So anyway, so there would be no need to say new application if you, in a declarative, articulate, overt way, said moratorium on mining. But that's not what they said. So the fact that they had to explicitly note the subcategory of mining called new mining makes me wonder if, in fact, old mining is still permissible. This is just how I'm thinking about it. And then Article 3, as the promulgation of this law, all applicants in process to obtain concessions for the exploration, extraction, transportation, and benefit of metallic minerals will be rejected, and the Ministry of Commerce and Industries will arrange for the archiving of these files with a period of 3 months following its promulgation. Well, yet again, all applications in process. Well, the application's not in process. It was passed into law on October 20th. So that tells me again, like all of this tells me that Cobre, Panama is good to go. I mean, according to this documentation. If you have any clarity on the topic, or ideas or thoughts, put it in the comment section. And then, what makes me wonder, so that's me, that's my belief. I'm thinking Cobre Panama is good to go, according to that one specific piece of legislation, mind you. But then a lot of news media outlets, such as Reuters and Bloomberg, which are somewhat credible, or at least treated that way, are also seemingly interpreting it that way, which would explain perhaps why those stocks rebounded come Thursday and Friday. Now, that doesn't mean that the Supreme Court can't escalate matters. That doesn't mean that the protests can't continue and escalate matters. But based upon that legislation that I just read, those articles, that tells me that Cobre Panama is good to go. So, and not to mention that the objectors of the mine even say that they slinked their way in a snaky fashion out of it. So, here we got some headline titles. Panama Congress, I didn't put a date on these, my apologies. November 2nd-ish, November 3rd, something like that. Panama Congress backtracks on plan to void copper mine contract. And then you have Bloomberg, the Spanish version, says the same thing. And then goes on to say, Panama's Congress backtracked on a plan to repeal a multi-billion-dollar copper mining contract as some lawmakers concluded it would be preferable for the Supreme Court to take this step. Well, that's interesting because that means things could change. Congress on Thursday eliminated an article in a mining bill that would have voided a contract with a Canadian miner, First Quantum Minerals. Lawmakers then passed the revised bill, which declares a moratorium on new permits for metal mining. The bill would need one more round of voting and the president's signature to become law. You know, you always got to watch how people speak, as I pointed out in that legislation. Because it gave you the impression that they were banning mining, but they were banning some mining. But some mining isn't all mining. Yet again, it's fascinating to watch. I could give you 1,000 examples of how people misrepresent things in their speech. It's absolutely beautiful. All the sentimentally true but factually false, look here, don't look here, misrepresentation. Like a quick silly example that actually, depending on how you want to, what degree of existential spiraling and level of abstraction you want to escalate things to, like a wife takes a piece of food. Like a wife says, hey, can I have a meatball? And then stabs her fork in her husband's plate, grabs the meatball and eats it before he responds. And then you can say, why did you ask him to have a meatball when you clearly didn't care what his response was, which is demonstrated by your behavior because you did not wait for his response. And she's like, well, it's not a big deal. It's like, no. Like, don't switch the conversation. That's not, I didn't ask, is it or isn't it a big deal? I asked why you asked the question. And she's like, well, he doesn't mind sharing his food with me. It's like, hold up. No one said anything about minding or not minding sharing food. That wasn't the question. The question was, why did you ask the question you asked? And that's because it's like a rhetorical smokescreen of pseudo-consideration while maintaining plausible appearance and optics of being a good person by technically, considerately asking. That's why. Now, of course, they're not consciously aware. As I've noted, people are barely sentient creatures. People go on and say things, and they don't know why they say things. But that's just a silly example. But then you could say, well, that's how she thinks it's okay to conduct herself in life. So how else might that manifest? Because it will manifest 1,000 times over. And then you have to ask yourself, is that the kind of character that you want to engage with? And if the answer is no, then that means you probably don't want to interact with people, since most people conduct themselves that way. Oh yes, so I'm not going to read through these. This has gone on long enough, and there's a lot of words in the following things. But these are some reviews of different companies, corporations, and sell-side analysts and stuff like that, making projections and coming out with estimates and ideas about the implications this has on First Quantum as a stock and how it will affect their performance as an investment. Got that. You got TD Cowen. First Quantum will be unable to service its debt without the cash flow from the flagship Panama asset. Yet again, I welcome you to pause the videos or pause the video and read these things if you're interested in purchasing First Quantum, get a more educated idea, get other people's opinions on the matter, or just as a case study and educate yourself. CIBC, equity research, have information, BMO estimates, First Quantum still has significant downside risk per latest note from Raymond James. With Cobre Panama removed, First Quantum still trades at a huge premium to the copper producer group average. Paradigm. Hopefully, if you zoom in, but a lot of videos, especially on your phone, you can zoom in and read still. So hopefully you'll be able to do that with this. So, if you're still watching, which probably practically no one is, the reason I care about all of this, besides as a case study, intellectually curious and so on and so forth, is the impact it had on Franco, Nevada, which is a royalty, predominantly a precious metals royalty and streaming business, even though they have oil and gas and a few other minerals that they have royalties and streaming services on. But Franco, Nevada, as you've noticed by my portfolio, if you've watched my videos before, familiar with me, I have gold mining stocks. I really am interested in royalty and streaming companies, and Franco, Nevada is one of those. And as I touched upon earlier in the video, you saw how Franco, Nevada was hit by this. And then it becomes my question, is this a time to buy? When is a time to buy? I don't know. I damn near came close to buying, I think it was actually Wednesday or Thursday, and now it's bouncing, and that's the problem. You want to be a guy who catches a falling knife, but you really want to be the guy who buys the very dip, and it's just hard to say. But here's a nice chart that I should have zoomed in on more. A multi-year chart going back to 2008 of Franco Nevada's channel performance. You'd call this technical analysis, whatever. And so according to this chart, it'd be a time to buy, because if it breaks it, then who knows where it'll go. And Cobre Panama is upwards of 20% of revenues. So that would put the stock at $109, and it fell to, from where it was on the Friday, I don't know, I want to get this right. One moment. If you're still watching, I'm sure you have patience for me to get the dates correct. So the 27th of October, it didn't really react. So from the 27th, but then on the 30th of Monday, October, that's when it fell 8%. So it was down 13% from the October 27th Friday close. So if you think that, let's go with the low end, that it was impacted by 16% and it was down 13%, then that could say that most of it was priced in, and now it's bouncing. And the reason it's bouncing is because of that, I suspect, is because of that legislation passing that exempts Cobre Panama from the mining moratorium. So then now you're pricing in this referendum on December 17th and how much propaganda and sense and emotional calming down will occur between now and then, and what the Supreme Court does, and if they can even legally do anything. And enough time for the government to spread the word and propagandize and do everything that governments do and people do, because the government is a collection of people that people do to manipulate others to do what they want. So you're counting on the Supreme Court and you're counting on the referendum to determine things. So do you take a stab at it? Well, that's up to you to decide. But the question I'm concerned with is, do I take a stab at it? And my only problem is that I think my portfolio at this point is roughly $2,000. And if you're unfamiliar with my channel, I'm not going to elaborate, so you'll just have to bear with me on the numbers. But it's $2,000 is the portfolio. And Franco Nevada is, we'll just call it $100 to keep math simple, even though it's $120. Math simple. If I buy one share of it, trying to buy the dip or the rebound in the dip at this point, then I've allocated 5% of my portfolio to a single share of a stock. You know, it's a gamble in a sense, but it's also a probabilistic estimation of the scope of potential outcomes. The problem I have is, so then to average down, it would make, I'd have to buy another share. Let's say Cobre Panama legitimately gets banned. The stock would then fall, I'm guessing, let's just say another 10%. So then do I just stomach the 10% down and have a negative 10% FNV ticker symbol on my portfolio, or do I buy another share and average down? Like, at that point now it's 10%. Like, I don't know if I want 10% of my portfolio in Franco Nevada, to be honest with you. And then during that time, other precious mineral stocks were also, gold and silver stocks were falling. Like, Franco Nevada was falling because of the Cobre Panama Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. But if you notice, precious metal stocks in general were also falling Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So that kind of helped exacerbate the downside in Franco Nevada. So I don't know. I don't honestly know what I'll do. Here's another chart. You could say, what would this be called? A massive bull flag? I don't know. A descending triangle. I don't know. A support line. Like, I don't know. Just more technical stuff, if you like it. Then, alternative ways you could play things is GDX. And here recently, SILJ, which is a ETF for silver miners, I think junior miners perhaps even, AG, which is first AG, ticker symbol, which is First Majestic, for whatever the reason, in the past week it fell 15%, which just so happened that SILJ, which is an ETF that holds that, it makes up a good enough weighting, multiple percents, fell a good deal. And you could say, well, is that because of silver mines altogether, or is that because one stock, which contributes, I don't know, 5-10% of the portfolio, fell 15%? Which is one reason to play ETFs, and another way to play single names, depending on how you want to split it. But my point here is GDX, which is the Van Eck Gold Miners ETF, as of, I don't know, midpoint in the week, Franco Nevada makes up 7.5% of the GDX. So if you're wondering, if you're expecting a rebound in Franco Nevada for it to remake all of its losses, then, but you're nervous about the exposure to Franco Nevada specifically, then you could buy GDX as more of a beta play as opposed to the alpha play of the Franco Nevada. Because if, in fact, Cobre Panama does get shut down, then GDX will not fall as much as Franco Nevada will. So you kind of curb some of your downside risk, but you also curb some of your outside. This is how you would structure a trade. It's just an idea. I'm not going to do this. If I do something, I'm buying Franco Nevada. And then you have Equity Research, RBC Capital Markets on Franco Nevada. They downgraded, interestingly enough. They price target, they dropped it from $155, and their now price target is $140. And the stock is trading at 120, 125, somewhere in there. So it dropped down to I don't know. It's trading around 120, and their price target is 140. Now, I don't really generally do trades for 16%, which is the price target is 16% above where it's at. So, you structure your trades however you want to. Now, they say downside scenario is 105. Now, if you heard me say earlier that there on that Friday, a 20.8% fall in the stock would lead it to being $109 a share. So, that's interesting how they come up with 105. I'm at 109, so we're ballpark figure. Their current price, current price, 121.55. Their price target is 140, and then the upside scenario is 155. So you can read this. Key points: Panama's president declared the country would hold a binding referendum by Cobre's Panama concession contract, scheduled for December 17th. Potential impairment to Cobre Panama stream for FNV ranges from 0% to 100%. As far as I'm concerned, it is one or the other. Most things in life aren't binary, but either Cobre Panama is going to provide more concessions and pay the government more. Either the mine's going to mine or it's not, I suspect. And so the royalty stream will either be there or it won't, which means that Franco Nevada will fall or rise accordingly to a stream or a royalty or no royalty. But it says potential impairment to Cobre Panama stream for FNV ranges from 0% to 100%, and clarity on this outcome is likely longer dated. Oh, the reason I said what I said was because it says it ranges from 0 to 100%. Like, I don't see Cobre Panama stream for FNV being 50%. Like, they're in a legally binding contract with Franco Nevada to provide the royalties, and they're in a legally binding contract to provide royalties to Panama. So, like, neither one of those entities are going to take a hit if, for instance, First Quantum has to pay more to Panama. Who will take a hit? Well, the shareholders of First Quantum is who. So I don't think it's a range, right? I think it's a binary dichotomy in outcome. Okay, and then regardless of the Cobre Panama outcome, FNV remains well-positioned financially, although valuation and multiple compression represents a risk for shares. I find the multiple compression be interesting, but like, why would they? The only reason a multiple compression would occur is because something along the lines of, oh no, Franco Nevada took a massive hit on a royalty from a company. This might indicate that they will take other hits on royalties from other places due to the outbreak of people saying not in my backyard, and therefore they get a multiple compression. But people, like, that's an understood risk of investing in mining and royalty and streaming companies. So, but just like in the banking fiasco in March, people pretend like something's true until it's not. Or, currency, the dollar, the dollar matters because everybody pretends like it matters. But if enough people defect and say it doesn't matter, then it stops mattering. It doesn't mean anything unless we agree it means something. So that's how valuations of things in the world work in large part. So, and that could happen. So I brought up the banking. It's like, well, you have held to maturity versus available for sale. And then, well, everybody knows that the held to maturities, if you mark to market it, then a lot of these companies have negative equity. Like, it was understood by anybody doing any serious securities analysis. And then one day, people pretended like it didn't matter. And then the next day, people pretended like it did matter. And then that went into the valuation. And then bank stocks took a nosedive. So you could do the same thing with Franco Nevada or royalties or mining companies in general. You could say, well, political risk is political risk, and therefore the multiples on these companies are what they are. And then one day you can say, oh, well, yeah, we kind of discounted that too heavily, so now we're going to revalue it, and therefore multiple compression occurs. But otherwise, this is just a revenue stream lost, and therefore the oh, I was trying to quote them. Oh, the valuation would take a hit, and the valuation would take a bit. It's valuation or multiple compression. Well, I don't see any reason for multiple compression to occur here. It's more of a valuation. If it provides 15% of revenue, then they get a 15% haircut. But I don't see a reason for multiple compression per se, especially from a blue chip royalty company. I just don't see it. But if you want to read this, read it. But I'm done here. This is the video. You can stay for the portfolio review that I do at end of every video. So here we go into that. Boom, portfolio. Stocks took a massive rip to the upside this week. The S&P's up 5%, just gapping up over the week. Everybody was bearish, and then the stock does this. Is there a bear market rally? Is it this? Is it that? I don't know. My portfolio only was up, I don't want to say only, but it was up, call it 4.2%, or it was up 4.5% roughly. And then the S&P was up 5.2% for the week. So you could say I underperformed the market. Many of these companies reported earnings, as you can see by the E. I might do a conference call summary on the offshore sector. Might not. I don't know. I wasn't planning on doing this video a week ago, and here we are. So Tidewater did, Valeris, Transocean, they all did earnings reports. And Transocean, whenever it came out, man, it was a market open, it fell. It was a beautiful move. I did not purchase any shares. It's interesting. I'm amazed that Valeris is actually doing better in my portfolio than Transocean is, especially for all the hate it gets. Now, the reason is very simple. Cost basis. I got in a better cost basis in Valeris than I did Transocean. And that's why Valeris is doing better in my portfolio than Transocean is, which is interesting. But once you know why, it's, I guess, not interesting. So, I don't know, Town Square, Surge Pay, all, up. Everything's pretty much up. Transocean, and in Louisiana Pacific, I think that's the most volatile stock in my portfolio. That thing is just all over the place. My goodness, up 40. I think I'm down 20%, and then I was up 40%, and then I was down 10%, and now I'm up. What am I? Up 4%, and then I'm quite nervous just by technical analysis, looking at a chart for DRS, Leonardo DRS. What's going on there? For a long-term hold, I suspect it might be a good company for reasons I won't get into, but where I bought in at, you got to understand, if it rips hard enough, I'll hold it as a long-term play. If it doesn't, then I'll let it go. And boy, it looks awfully toppy. Like some things are going to have to escalate overseas I suspect, for it to do well. I actually almost cut it and added to other positions, but I didn't. The Transocean dip, I think I was mentioning, it fell like 7 or 8% in the morning for half an hour, and then the rest of the day it recovered all of that. So it was down 7%, then was up like 8%, and then slightly closed down on the day. Did I add? No. Why? Well, because as I've noted in how I structure my portfolio, 33% to a position. And my offshore portfolio, if you haven't noticed, these names are not doing the best, and they've pretty much erased all gains since July. So I went from it being 40% of my portfolio to now roughly 34% of my portfolio. And since I have a 33% thematic exposure and offshore is a theme, I'm not to add by my own quote-unquote arbitrary rules. So I didn't. And all that adding does at this price, you can say, well, if you think long-term it's a double or a triple, then I should add, and fair enough. But number one, I'm over my thematic exposure, and number two, it'd be nice to add it if it falls lower. That presupposes it falls lower. I'm not saying it is. It actually looks like a good place for it to bottom and bounce. So, which you then might say, well, then you should be buying it if you think this was the bottom and it's bouncing. And I would say, maybe. Knowing that the cash flows will dilute my concentration in the portfolio over time. And although it's slightly above my threshold, I know in a couple of months it'll be below my threshold. And therefore, assuming things go well in the markets, meaning to the upside, that it will be below my threshold, and therefore it'd be a smart move. And fair enough. But I'm at the point now, I wouldn't mind having a little bit more cash, perhaps adding to certain names. And if it was just below my threshold, say I was at 32% concentration, more likely than not, I would have added to it. But it's not below my threshold, so I'm staying disciplined. One of the many reasons why people don't make it in the game. I need to worry about downside risk, not just upside reward. And I also was concerned about cash for in case I bought Franco Nevada, because $120, say I have $330 cash. I buy Franco Nevada, my cash position falls by over a third. I got to keep that in mind. So I did, and fundamentally it was 33% concentration threshold. That's why I didn't buy. Copper, I'm not copper. Gold's just bouncing around and teasing everyone. Whatever. I don't really care. Triple flag up again. It's just kind of bouncing around. Just bouncing around in this low $13 range. Whatever. No one really cares about Leonardo. No one cares about Surge Pay. No one cares about Town Square. No one cares about gold. Pretty much everybody watches this for uranium and offshore oil. So I've covered those. Uranium is doing what uranium does. So hasn't ripped lately. Hasn't massively collapsed lately. It's just kind of floating along. Probably, well, it's treating me quite well. So Sprout Physical Uranium really hasn't dipped too hard, so I really haven't added to the position. Of course, yeah, I wish I added more, because thematically, Sprout Uranium Miners is 18%, and thematic expression concentration allows me 33%, which means, and 20% to any given name. So that means I could use all my cash, and, well, pretty much all my cash. I have 14% cash, so Sprout Physical Uranium Trust is 2%. So that's 13% of my cash, so practically all my cash. Dump it all into Sprout Physical Uranium and call it good, but, I'm up 10% on my cost basis, so who wants to add here? Plus, I like to buy the dips, and I did buy the dip. I just didn't buy enough of the dip, seemingly, because I was afraid it was going to fall more. So you always want to, what is it? How's that expression go? You always want to buy enough that if it goes up, you wish you bought more. And I really like that saying. And with that, I'm going to end it here. Thank you for watching, and until next time.